Again, we appreciate you joined us today. We know that everybody's busy this time of year. There's still firefighting going on out west. There's still a lot of activities going on, but that means the helicopter's in the air, and that means there's going to be some great photography. And that's what brings us here today. We know that a lot of our operators shoot aerial photography. And so we've started to talk to some of the professionals who, well, quite honestly, know what they're doing. They've been making aviation or making the pilots look good since 1903. Today's our panelists are going to include Jim Viola, the president and CEO of HAI. We have Ned Dawson, who is the owner of Kaha Media and publisher of HeliOps, HeliOps Frontline, and Air Attack magazines. We have Lyn Burks, who is the owner and editor-in-chief of Rotorcraft Pro magazine. And we have Mike Reyno, who is the publisher and owner of Vertical and Valor, among other publications. This webinar, like all of ours, is interactive. We do encourage you to ask questions. We're really looking forward to the questions, as a matter of fact, today. In fact, we're willing to go a little bit longer today if necessary. Our panelists have agreed that they can stay on. We're not going to go quite as long as last week, but we want to make sure that everybody gets the questions answered. To ask the questions, I do ask that you use the question module, not the chat module. Those are, I try to keep just the question module open in my computer. That's usually at the bottom of your screen or on the side of your screen, depending on what kind of computer you're using to access this webinar today. The webinar is being recorded. If you do want to miss something and you want to go back and watch it, or if you want to share this with other people, feel free to do so. We'll try to get the link around either tomorrow or Monday at the latest. And so right now, let me stop sharing. I would like to introduce Jim Viola, our president and CEO of HAI.
Thanks, Dan. Today's webinar, of course, focuses on aerial photography. Earlier this year, we conducted a member survey where we learned quite a bit of our operator members engaged in aerial photography missions, as we tried to figure out, what are all the missions that vertical flight helicopters are used for. So the one additional thing we learned too is that people in the industry love to look at pictures of helicopters. And some of the people here work at HI now, Jasmine being one of them for our social media. We even see that a lot of the likes and looks, the red helicopters seem to even attract more attention than normal. So it's interesting to look forward to hearing from our three photographers today in the panel and the questions that you asked them about photography overall for aviation, and then more specifically helicopter or verticals and how they get those images and what they do to get them looking so beautiful on the cover of a magazine. So I think today everybody will have some information that comes away from this. The low time pilots that can learn from how to coordinate these flights. The high time pilots can learn what photographers need to get the best images. And then the photographers can learn what goes into taking those pictures that can get you to the cover of that magazine. With today's GoPro video cameras and cell phones that produce amazing images, it might not be quite as easy as it looks to get that photo. And they're certainly different from just taking a photo during a sightseeing flight. So lots of stuff to catch up with today. And the three gentlemen today, among many others who shoot aircraft and spend time coordinating that mission. So it is coordinating the mission just like any other mission that the helicopter or aircraft is going to do. The pilots and the photographers communicate what are the expectations of that mission and what are the desired outcomes. And then always got to keep safety in mind, because a lot of the photo ops, of course, will be doors off or doors open to get that great picture. So a little extra caution to make sure nothing blows out or falls out of the aircraft. So let's hear how it's done and get back to you, Dan. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. I'd now like to introduce Lyn Burks, the president and editor-in-chief of Rotorcraft Pro.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. Let me go ahead and get my presentation up. Let me know when you can see that.
We've got it, Lyn.
All right, great. So I'm probably the odd person out of the three of us, because really my success in shooting photography and video in the helicopter world relies less on my ability to own and operate a camera, but probably more on my nearly 6,000 hours as a working helicopter pilot over the last 30 years. I've been a photographer for a long time. I never considered myself to be a helicopter photographer until I got into the media business. And then I took my passion for photography and then I combined it with my knowledge of actually flying helicopters. So that's why Dan asked me to go ahead and start today. And I specifically want to talk about the disconnect between photographers and pilots. So I'm going to be wearing my pilot hat more of the time, even though I have an understanding of both sides of the equation. I'll just talk for 9 or 10 minutes, cover some of these things, very high level, 10,000 foot. I'm not going to go into the weeds because, you know, I'm honored to be here with Ned and with Mike. They have, you know, decades of experience and they can definitely get into the weeds on some of these subjects. But I just want to get some of these subjects out on the table. And I want to start by talking about what are the photographer's priorities. Okay, typically they are, and I'm just going to give the, like I said, this is 10,000 feet. Light, they want to go where the light's at. Like this photographer, this photo here, this is, I was in the Dominican Republic, direct lighting on this beautiful aircraft with beautiful water and surroundings. You might have a backlit subject such as this, another backlit subject such as this. So there's a variety of different types of lights that they're looking for. It could also be side lit as well. Composition, what are you trying to focus on? Is the focus, this is in the Dominican Republic, is the focus this beautiful jungle environment with a, you know, with a waterfall, with a helicopter in the middle of it? Or is the focus the actual aircraft itself? So composition is something. Background comes into play. Sometimes you have the background blurred out and it's the helicopters in focus, but sometimes like these 2 aircraft of Maverick helicopters in the Valley of Fire National Park, beautiful background makes the helicopters pop. So sometimes background is something to consider in where you're going to position the helicopter. Also, just getting a really cool shot that's unique or interesting. Here's one of CBP. There's a lot going on. In that last photo I had, there's a lot going on. There's a dog, there's some cops, there's a helicopter. That dog just jumped out of the helicopter and chased this man down. In this shot here, there's a lot going on. Helicopter with a fast roper. This is when I was with US Customs at the Super Bowl in Atlanta, and they were training prior to that. And then safety. So safety is of the utmost importance, but it may not be at the top of the list for the photographer because they may not know what they're getting themselves into when they're jumping into a helicopter or moving around a helicopter during a photo shoot. Now, let me take off the photographer hat and let's talk about what are the pilot's priorities. So safety is always going to be number one for the pilot. We're trained through the lens of safety. Not getting in trouble with the boss when the photos come out. That's something that they're going to be thinking about when you're asking them to put the helicopter in a position to get a shot. The stupid photographer doing something stupid. This is a thing here. This is in the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. We were embedded with an Apache squadron. This is my videographer, and we're in a FARP loading 2.75 millimeter rockets, doing live fire operations. And it requires a level of trust and rapport for a photographer or videographer to be operating around aircraft. The pilots need to know that they can trust you, that you will not do something stupid. Risk assessment. Now, some of these terms I'm about to throw out, I'm not going to dive into these at all, but if you're an aspiring photographer, what I would encourage you to do before you go on your first helicopter operation is write down some of these terms and then also look them up on YouTube, look them up on Google, watch some videos regarding these. Aircraft performance, IGE, in-ground effect, OGE, out-of-ground effect. That refers to hovering, out-of-ground effect. Understand the HV diagram or the HV curve. Understand wind limitations so that you understand that. Like I said, go watch some YouTube videos on those specific terms, because you'll learn that when I asked the pilot rather to put the helicopter in the specific position, and it's a really windy day or it's a high density altitude, the pilot may say no. At least you'll have a better understanding of why they're saying no. And you may also not ask the pilot to put the aircraft in a bad position, although they shouldn't let you. Wind direction and effects. This is a huge one. If you're out flying on a windy day, trying to get two aircraft doing air to air into position to get a beautiful shot, you might have the perfect light, but the wind may not be working with you. So you got to know what areas wind would be coming from on the aircraft that could cause a problem, either from aircraft stability standpoint or some other conditions like LTE, loss of tail rotor effectiveness, not fun, vortex interference, weathercock stability, and settling with power. These are some things that if you're not aware of, the aircraft could get into a very bad circumstance, and it's not going to look good on you or the pilot. Pilot experience. I found pilot experience to be one of the larger barriers that I've seen to getting great photography. Generally speaking, and I'm just being general here, if you're doing air-to-air, lower experienced pilots traditionally have a much more difficult time getting you into position doing air-to-air photos, vice versa. Higher experience, when you start getting up into the 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 hour range, things start getting easier. If you got a pilot that's got 400, 500, or 600 hours doing air-to-air, you need to have your radar on high and not ask the pilot to go beyond their limitations. They're going to want to please you, and you want to try and not get ask them to put the aircraft into a bad position. So consider both pilots' experience when you're doing air-to-air photography. Aircraft limitations. What happens when you take a door off of an aircraft? If you're in a small aircraft, a light aircraft, and you're photoing a larger, faster aircraft, the instant you take the doors off, the VNE, or never exceed speed, is going to decrease. So take speed into consideration. That's just one example. There are many others. Regulations, the pilot's going to be considering that. If you're going offshore, for example, and you're going to be doing, and you're going to be away from the shore, not within autorotative distance, then you're going to want to consider personal flotation devices, either on your body or in the aircraft. Those are things the pilot will be thinking about. Environmental contingencies. I've flown in various countries all over the world in some really harsh environments, and you need to think about, is it freezing cold? Am I going to be stuck in a jungle if the engine quits and the helicopter goes down? And you're going to be out there for a while exposed to the elements. Do you need a survival kit? How are you going to be dressed? Those are things you need to consider. Like I said, these are all just high-level things that the pilot is going to be thinking about. And if you're an aspiring photographer, you can try and put yourself into the mind of the pilot. So is there a disconnect between the photographer and the pilot? And I want to say typically there is, because there's not a real understanding of what the other needs and what their priorities are. And that's the purpose of this presentation. So what tools do we have to bridge that gap and reconnect the pilot and the photographer? A pre-shoot briefing and constant effective communications is the absolute most important thing you can do. I've walked into operations, we're like, hey, the aircraft's outside, let's go. Let's hop in and let's go. Timeout, we're not going to do that. We need to talk about what kind of shots we're trying to get and how can we set ourselves up for success by briefing them, talking about the environment in the area, and also how do we maintain effective communications during the entire flight, whether you're doing air to air or one's on the ground and one's in the air, things of that nature. I won't go into detail here because my colleagues have great experience in these areas, and I'm sure that Mike and Ned are going to help us dig into that. So I'm going to close with my general approach, personally, just my general approach to capturing images of helicopter ops. And I like to say helicopter operations because I don't really consider myself a helicopter specific photographer. I try to capture operations, things of that nature. So it hinges on three items. It's always safety for me, safety first, and it should be for you as well, whether you're a pilot or a photographer. Will the image convey what the operation actually does? As you can see in this image, it was a Sundance helicopter tour image, and you could see a tourist enjoying the flight. So this image specifically conveys what Sundance helicopter did in the Grand Canyon. Finally, the human element is probably the biggest component of my personal style of photography. Although I appreciate, beautiful shots of just helicopters in a beautiful environment, I always try to have people in the images. Never forget, helicopters are cool, but they're only cool because of the people, who make them cool. This specific photo it's nothing extraordinary in that I'm on the ground, the helicopter's landing in the background. I was in Haiti actually for this photo. I was doing missionary work there and took a few days to go do a helicopter shoot. And I was working with Haiti Air Ambulances, which is Haiti Air Ambulance. It was an air methods operation. They were landing on a mountaintop there. And the people were coming out of the jungle up to the mountaintop, and they were going to transport a patient off the top of the mountain. Of course, there's no LZ guards or anything. When the helicopter starts landing, people started running. This photo is unique just because of the cultural aspect, and we received a lot of accolades and a lot of comments for that particular photo. So I'm going to pause right there. I'll stop sharing my screen. I have some other information that we may bring in a little bit later, but I want to kick it back to Dan, and I hope this helped kind of like set the foundation for the conversation to come. Dan, are you there? Dan, you're muted.
Of course I'm muted. I was just saying how much I appreciate all your photos, and that if you sold t-shirts that said helicopters are cool because of the people who make them cool, I'm certain I would buy a handful of those. Let's go ahead and jump over to Ned Dawson now from HeliOps magazine. Ned, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure, Dan. And, you know, to my fellow panelists, to Jim and everyone, thanks for having us on board. One thing I wanted to sort of reiterate in what Lyn was saying, that 90% of all images that you see out there are staged, as in set up properly, good briefings, etc. But there are also times when they're impromptu type ones, but you also have to take into consideration the safety aspects as well. Now, this one that I've got up on the screen, I presume everyone can see it,
Yes.
was in Dubai with the Royal flight. Now, one of the things I've found when shooting civilian machines is if you want to try and do a formation shoot, ideally, not always, but ideally, it's great to have ex-military pilots. Reason for that is they're formation trained, they've done hundreds and hundreds of hours of it at night, during the daytime, crap weather, you name it. So this one, it took us about 5 or 6 long passes to get this right, because we had the least experienced guy in the front. Then you get the 2 most experienced guys in the middle to, you know, because they're in the positions where it can turn bad pretty quickly if they're not on their game. And then having the second least experienced guy on the outside, it allows them, the guy on the left can move out, the guy on the lead can move right, and it just makes it a lot much easier. You also find that briefing something like this, we went out specifically this day to shoot a formation shoot. So all our briefings for about an hour was, okay, who's going to be where? How are we going to separate the formation? Because you can only fly the one direction for a certain period of time. We were lucky in the United Arab Emirates, there's a heck of a lot of sand dunes. And we went out early morning. To get this one shot probably took us about 40 minutes. We had to do 2 or 3 passes with the sun behind us, just because to get the gaps right between the aircraft. I have probably another 500 photos where the gap between 1 and 2 is narrow, the aircraft between 3 and 4 overlap. Again, it comes back to that briefing with everyone. And a lot of times the communication, like Lyn said before, is imperative. Like number 2, step up a little bit. Number 3, step down, go back a little bit. And the chatter between everything, between all the crews, was extensive. Admittedly, from the photographer, the chatter was most because I'm telling everyone what to do. Let me go on to a second image here. Where are we? So how to do this? Share screen. Okay. What I was saying before is some operations or shoots you can brief, and it's real easy. For example, like the last one that I showed you in Dubai. This one, however, was totally different. Yes, we knew what we wanted to get, but we had to actually find the location. So I was flying with one of Blackcomb Helicopters pilot, Steve Gray, who's probably one of the best movie pilots out there. Very, very experienced aviator. And we were lucky. I think we're in, I can't remember if we were in the B3 or an EC-130 that day, but we found this position. And again, it was the communications between the crews. We said to that crew, the EC-135 crew, hey, we found this little spot down here in amongst the river. There was steep hills either side, very narrow window. Wind was coming up the river. So the 135 is facing into the river. Everyone had to be happy with it. We asked them, are you happy to go there? I asked my guy, Steve, hey, Steve, can we hover right here facing across? We'd have a front quartering wind. And that way it gives you a whole perspective where you're in tight and close. But the one thing to remember, and I'm not sure if Lyn delved into this, but you have to have an escape route, because obviously we're in a single, they're in a twin. They could easily fly away down the river. If we don't, then if we have an engine failure or something turns bad, there's only one place that we're going. So we try to minimize everything. If we have an issue, then we have a flyaway. So no matter what shoot you are doing, whether you are up in the mountains, down in a river valley like this, even out in flat open area, you always have an escape route for yourself and for the other aircraft that you are shooting. To me, that's a no-brainer. With every shoot that I set up, I need to know, okay, Steve, anything happens, we're going to our 1 o'clock and fly away, or 1 o'clock, there's an open area there. You couldn't see, but there was a slight little beach area that we could have landed on had anything gone wrong. With the EC-135 in the photo that you see, they had a flyaway down the river and out. So again, safety is always important, and that will never change. Let me find another image here. Okay, just a sec. Okay, now this image, I'm in a privileged position where I get to fly with all the air attack supervisors on the bushfires in Australia, both with the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, which I've been doing for 20 or so years, and also with DELP in Victoria. This is a little bit different because this stuff is never planned, but there's the trust factor there with the air attack supervisors and the flight crews that we're working with. Bottom line, as Jim Viola said, everybody loves seeing cool photos of helicopters at work, especially the guys flying them, the operators, because they get to use them for marketing materials. And hey, as a magazine producer, we get to use them in the pages of our magazine. This one, for example, I was up with Wayne Rigg, who's a air attack supervisor in Melbourne, Australia, and we were on fires out at Wye River, which is way out in eastern Victoria, along the coastline. We checked with the Helimax crew. They knew we were up there. We'd spoken to the guys on the ground prior saying, hey, if you're happy, we want to try and come in close, get a few photos and see what we can do. It worked out that we were able to come to a hover up on the side of the mountain. The Chinook was dropping, as you can see, on some hot spots down in a river valley there. We said to the crew, hey, we're going to come to a hover. Are you happy for us to hover here and you fly straight underneath us? Now, on that day, we were in a single squirrel, so an AS350B2. When doing shots like this, something you need to always remember is your downwash. Now, obviously, you're thinking, oh, well, that's a Chinook, you know, it can just do whatever it wants. That may be the case, but the downwash still affects it. Now, he's only probably 100 feet above the trees, has 150 to 200 foot long line. The last thing you want is for our downwash to then take his lift away and cause him to lose 50 or 100 feet, especially when he's only 50 or 100 feet above the trees after dropping his load. So we held our position. He flew straight underneath us. he was prepared, like had the hand on the cyclic, in the collective. And obviously as he comes underneath us, he's prepared that he will get that downwash. And it worked out well. So we were happy with that one. There's this other one here. Just getting the hang of this, so give me a sec. Okay, now this next image is, again, going back to what Lyn says with safety. This had a whole lot of wrong with it when you first look at it. It's got a human external load underneath, as in a guy working on the marker balls. We've got wires in front of us. We had wires behind us. I positioned with actually Aaron Fitzgerald, who flies the Red Bull VR105. I was flying with Aaron in another 500. We wanted to get the shot, but also not fly straight over the top of him, because obviously take his downwash away from him. Guy on the end of the line could be in some extreme trouble. So again, working in an environment like this, 99% of the time, you're told, stay away from wires. They're dangerous. They will kill you. Yes, they will, but they can also work to make a great shot. You just have to remember that they are there. And that whole situational awareness, you're the pilot's other set of eyes. And you always remember that. If you see something that you don't like, talk to the pilot. If you see something that's not working, again, talk to him. But your situational awareness is just as important as the pilot's. So it's, these are just little things to keep in mind. I've got one other image I'll show you from the fires here, which we will use. Oh, give me 1 second here. There, share. Okay, now this one, going back to what I was saying about working on the bushfires, a lot of this stuff is ad hoc. And again, still, you've got to take safety into consideration. The idea of this is to get the shots of the crane working on the fires. This was on the big East Gippsland fires in Eastern Victoria, where they were evacuating people off the beaches. Again, I'm sitting in the side of a AS350BA on this day with the window down. So we were lucky. We didn't have to worry about VNEs like Lyn alluded to before, but we had 6 other aircraft dropping on the same fire. Your situational awareness in things like this is very, very important. You can't just go, I'm here to get my shot, bugger everyone else. I'm going to get what I need. We had to look out where the crane was, where the 261s were, where the Huey was. So, and also keep us out of the way as they're coming in to drop, but also get positioned so we can get a great shot. Working with the air attack supervisors, Ross McGuigan, who was flying the crane on this day, again, that trust factor comes in. If they know that you will get a great shot, but you'll stay out of their way, let them do what they need to. And we had to watch Ross do a couple of drops before we positioned ourselves, because coming through here, okay, is he going to turn left or is he going to turn right? Will he climb up or will he descend down? The last thing we want to do is go to Ross, okay, we're going to hover here. Next minute we move. He does a sharp left to break off after doing his drop. And guess who's right in the middle of his flight path? Us. That would not be a good day for anyone. But again, you can get great shots that aren't strictly briefed to the T, but every situation is different. And again, going back to what Lyn and the others will say, safety is number one, and that is not compromisable. So I'll stop sharing mine. I'll pass this back over to Dan, and we'll go from there. And good luck with everyone.
Thanks, Ned. Those are great images and really great information as well, building, of course, on top of what Lyn said. So I think that that worked out really well. Mike Reyno, would you bring your camera up and we'll talk about some of your photos today?
Hi, Dan. Thanks for putting this together. I think it's great for people to be able to see, learn some of the things that go on behind the scenes when it comes to helicopter photography. I was saying this prior to going live here, that 3 of us that own the magazines are all photographers. You don't see that in any other aviation magazine. So you look on the fixed wing side, it's very unusual that you have 3 owners of magazines and their priority is, we all started as photographers. Lyn, though, started as a helicopter pilot. One of the things that has obviously come across is safety. Safety is paramount, communications paramount. But I think what some of the things that we address, I'm going to touch on harnesses here in a little bit, but I wanted to start to show some of the fun pictures that we're able to do with helicopter photography. I think one of the things that we're lucky with in the world of helicopters is they're far more charismatic than if you're saying on the fixed wing side. So helicopters, you can take one helicopter, we'll call it, say, a Bell 412, and if Bell 412 can do 12 different missions, you take, say, a Cessna Caravan, and that can basically do 3 different missions. So it's great to be able to showcase helicopters, what they do, what they do best, and do it in a safe manner. But I want to show, Dan, I've left you the responsibility to put up any of the photos that I sent. So I guess we're going to actually start with one of the hardest photos here, is with Red Bull. So this is Aaron Fitzgerald flying the BO-105. I had the privilege of flying with Aaron a couple of years ago. And this was by far the most challenging photo shoot I had ever done with a helicopter. The thing is that with a BO-105, we're flying aerobatics. That's one of the only helicopters in the world that you can do that. And we're flying in an R-44. So how are you able to capture what Aaron is doing in the BO-105? So in this case, we had to do what I don't typically like to do in a helicopter when it's hot and high, is that we're in an R-44 and we had to go into a hover for most cases. But it was early in the morning. Our altitude wasn't too bad. We had to be at a certain altitude, obviously, for Aaron to do some of the maneuvers that he was doing. Here, Aaron's performing a barrel roll. But typically you'd be flying in a formation when they're doing just straight and level. I mean, we're doing straight and level, but then he started doing barrel rolls. So in order to mitigate risk, we set up in a situation where there was not going to be any risk of him coming towards us, flying into us, and things like that. So this was very difficult. How do you avoid vibrations from the aircraft that you're shooting from? So there's been many times when we've briefed with pilots that are unaware of capabilities of cameras and camera lenses, that they say, well, you've got to put a 500 mil lens on, you can get them, you can bring them in close. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Typically, the longest focal length I'm going to use on a photo shoot is going to be that 70 to 200 range. Once you get beyond that 200, what starts as a small vibration in the helicopter at your point, by the time it reaches the other aircraft you're shooting, that vibration has gotten more severe. So it becomes a little bit more difficult when you get beyond those focal lengths. So this was a 7200 mil lens. And this took 3 tries to be able to get a shot that was just tack sharp, because you're in a helicopter that's vibrating. You have a helicopter that's approaching at 100 knots and he's rolling at the same time as he's going past you. So to be able to capture everything, and I believe that one was at about a 1/60th for shutter speed. It takes a lot of effort to try and get that. A lot of communication. That was the big thing, is where to set up, wind, big thing with hovering at a ground effect. So a lot went into that shot. If you can show the next shot there, Dan.
Coming up.
So here's something I love to do with helicopters and sunsets. One of the things we always shoot for golden hours, it's either sunrise or sunset. So you're typically in that hour before sunset or hour just after sunrise. So this was, I was flying with Scott Urchel with Pylon Aviation. These are 2 brand new H-125s. We're flying over the Superstitions outside of Phoenix when we did this. So we did a whole series of photos, and we were just heading back in loose formation. And as the sun was starting to lower, then you started to see the change in the light. So this is an unedited photo right out of the camera. So I just wanted to show you, if you get your settings right, usually you can get a pretty good job. You're just playing with your f-stops. I like to use the technology that's in the camera. So I'm either going to choose to do my f-stop and let the camera do the shutter speed, or I'm going to do the reverse. So in this one, I played with the f-stop until I could get it down where I could get the colors that I wanted. I got the helicopters in the best formation that I could. In this case, one of the pilots I was dealing with didn't have as much formation flying. So again, you're working with them to keep things safe. And this is the type of photo that you're able to get. And a photo like this has a very, very long shelf life. So if you're a reader of Vertical Magazine or Valor Magazine, this is probably a shot that you've seen a lot. We're just about to launch HeliTrader. That's another photo because it's nondescript. So if I've got a story that's just talking about an H-125, not a particular operator, this is something I can put in there. If we're talking about the state of the industry, if we're talking about aircraft sales and things like that. So this is a great image that you can use to illustrate those types of stories. Dan, if you want to go to the next photo. So this is another favorite shot. So one of the most difficult things in the world of helicopter photography is taking a good cockpit photo. The surprising thing is that the HDR capability of these iPhones is unbelievable when you look at, and I'm sure Lyn and Ned can attest to this, what we have to do with our DSLRs to get that shot. It takes me about 5 minutes to set that shot up. The iPhone can do it in one snap. It will get the brightness on the screens. It will get the outside light. Everything will be perfect. This one I did shoot with my DSLR. But I'm going to share a trick here. How do you do it? Everyone goes, well, how do you get the outside light and the inside light to replicate everything? Again, this is right out of the camera. So a quick trick you use. So I've got a flash on the camera. Sometimes when you're doing the photography, you have to work fast, especially if I'm trying to get something in the moment. We're in a bank, pilot's looking to the left. Throw your camera to program. Put your camera to the window, get your reading. Bring the camera back in, switch to manual, pop your flash. So that's how I'm able to get these shots. Sometimes you just got to play with your f-stop a couple or your shutter speed to get the light just perfect. But I can get that shot usually pretty quick with the flash. And if you look in the visor of Ardell here, this was with Nova Scotia Natural Resources. You can actually see the flash firing in his visor. Now, if that went in the magazine, we might Photoshop out that little flash, but that would be about it. So this is shot with a 10mm lens. But again, it's something to show what Lyn talked to before is bringing that human element into what we're covering, because it's the people that really make this all work. And besides that, they love seeing their photos in the magazine. So that's always a big thing. I know some have mentioned when they walk around Heli Expo that people are tapping them on the shoulder saying, "Hey, I saw you in Vertical or Valor or one of the other magazines." So that's how we do that shot. Dan, if we can go to the next photo. So here's a good example of a shot that's set up. So what are the odds that we can do training where there's a waterfall, where it's a picturesque background like this? I mean, that just doesn't happen very often. But people always say that when I do a photo shoot, we always manage to find a waterfall somewhere. In this case, this is flying with 442 Squadron out of Comox, British Columbia. So one of the prettiest places in Canada to go. And we did a flight. We were doing a training flight, and we landed in this location. They wanted to show me the falls. And we started talking. We said, we could set up and do some training right here. So with communication on the ground, we talked about, okay, here's what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is where I'm going to stand. And I had a radio as well, so I could be in communication with the pilots at all times. So I was calling for the SAR techs to go down on the line. And in this particular case, I had him sit on the line there for about 30 seconds to make sure that we got the photo. It was difficult on the bottom because the cormorant is so heavy. The downwash is pretty severe on it. So there was lots of debris that was flying on the bottom side of the photo. But once that all settled down, then we were able to get a pretty interesting and unique shot of the cormorant. So you probably notice in Vertical, if I'm doing photos, you'll see a lot of waterfalls in these. So Dan, I'm not sure if there was one more or not.
No, that's it. Mike.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things that that I want to touch on is back to the safety side of things. We're sitting in a helicopter, open door. What sort of things do you do to mitigate risk? Mitigate that, okay, I don't have a camera bag going out the door. I don't have a camera lens going out the door, a camera falling. There's all sorts of things that can happen when you're flying with open doors. The other thing is what's keeping you in the aircraft. So there was an accident that happened several years ago. It was a crash in the Hudson River with a company, Flying Ion, and several people perished in that because they were wearing non-aviation harnesses when this incident happened, and several people passed away on that. As a result of that, the FAA came forward and said that we must have approved harnesses. So these harnesses, and Dan's going to show a picture here of these harnesses. So here's a great example of an approved harness. This is Air Rescue Systems. This is their 338 HeliOps harness. No, Ned, this is not named after your magazine. So this is the harness that they offer, and this is FAA approved. So what you'll notice is that on the left-hand side, it has quick release. So if something happens, I can get out of the aircraft relatively easy. You'll see there's beads that are on the gold beads that are there. So basically like parachute beads. So if for whatever reason an incident happens in the aircraft, I have to get out, I can pull that quick release and I can get out of the aircraft. So the carabiner, the top part that you're seeing on the photo here, that's what I'm going to put into any place on the helicopter that is approved to have tie downs or anything that can be strapped to them. I will also take those and I'll strap down my camera bag. So I'm doing everything I can to ensure that A, I'm not going to fall out of the helicopter, B, I'm not going to have any equipment fall out of the helicopter. So that's a big important one, is that I've seen people just going up with seatbelts. They'll use electrical tape with the seatbelt. If you're just keeping with the door closed, that's fine. But you always have to do whatever you can, that if you're keeping yourself in the aircraft, if you're doing things like the electrical tape just as an extra safety measure, that you have it so you can quickly get out of the aircraft if needed. And I only recommend that if you have doors on in a situation like that. So this is a big thing, is the safety aspect for when we're doing these photos. They look cool when we're doing them, but a lot of times I'll come back from a photo mission and the pilots will say, I had no idea what went into taking these photos. So now they do. And the one more thing I just want to touch on, Dan, before I hand it back over to you, is that we're talking about aviation photography. So I'd like to call, Ned and Lyn and myself, I call us like we're the old guard. Okay. Like we're the ones that like we're starting to pass the torch on. The Lloyd Horgans that are out there, the Anthony Pecci's that are out there, like the young guys that they're coming up through the ranks and they're doing some phenomenal work. One of the things they're doing with it is video. And these iPhones, or if you're on the Samsung, the video quality that comes out of these is incredible. So what I'm doing is that when I'm flying, I have a mount for my phone on top of my camera, and I can actually just hit record and I can record everything. So we can use those for social media. So everything from Facebook, Instagram, we're now on TikTok. So we can take what's here in the phones and we can use that. So video is becoming very, very important in the world of aviation photography, and especially for what we do, because it's such an interesting, we get to see a lot of interesting things with helicopters that it's great to see it on video. So for example, Ned, you're showing the 500 there with the human external load and going into the wires for the ball marker. I mean, to be able to show that on video is so much more compelling than seeing just the photo. The photo is fantastic, but now when you see it on on video. So helicopters lend themselves to video. So that's one of the things that I think for anyone that's coming up through the ranks now, or that wants to get involved in helicopter photography. In my case, a lot of times, first question is, have you done this before? Second question is, do you shoot video? That is a very big thing for what we're doing now. And that's all I have for Dan. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Mike. And now I'd like to invite Ned and Lynn to come back on, and we can start a little bit of a roundtable discussion and maybe get in a few questions from our attendees as well. One of the questions, well, let's see. I think you addressed the one on the safety rigging, but Warwick Patterson from Squamish, British Columbia, was asking if you tether your cameras. And I know that you, I think Ned and Mike had both alluded to making sure that you have things secured when the cabin doors are open. So how far do you go with, tethering camera bags, cameras, anything else that might be loose inside the cabin of the aircraft?
I guess I can answer.
You go, Mike.
Okay, so for me, so everything all the equipment is tethered, minus my camera. My camera, I'm using the strap. So that's how I'm secure. I'm just securing the camera just on body for myself.
Yeah, and I'll say the same thing. Everything that I have, I try to keep it to a minimum. If I have to take my camera bag, it's carabined in. It's got seat belts over it. I have been on shoots with other photographers where, it's going to be cold. I'm going to chuck a jacket underneath the seat and I'll put it on later. I'm going to show you something here, and I'll show everyone here. I had some friends of mine in New Zealand that this is what happened and was what's left of a 500 after a jacket that was in the back seat of it came out the door and ended up in the tail rotor. Within probably 2 seconds, tail rotor and tail assembly of the 500 disappeared and all three were killed. So this is a graphic reminder to everyone, anything that's loose in an aircraft, if it gets out that door, all it takes is that one little split second and it can turn a bad day into a very bad day.
Absolutely agree. Lynn, did you have anything you want to add to that?
I agree with both these gentlemen. I will, if we're doing doors off operation, the bag is going to be carabiner. I always bring my own carabiner, my own straps, just in case. You can either go to an approved place for strapping things down to the floor, or like Ned said, if there's a seat belt or something like that, you can at least attach it to that. So my camera bag is zipped up tight and is locked down. My camera is usually connected between my harness and the camera itself. It depends on whether I'm doing just photography or video, because sometimes I do a lot of video where I'll have a gimbal. I'll have a smaller camera on top of a gimbal. And then if the doors are closed, or I mean, if the doors are on and they're sliding doors, then if I want to change lenses or something happens and I need to make a shift in the way I'm doing things, then I'll likely close the door before I open my camera bag. There's nothing worse than having to open your camera bag in flight and change lenses or doing something like that, and you have a loose lens cap or dirt's flying into your bag or something along those lines. But if the doors are open or off, I try not to open the camera bag at all, and I try to be completely prepared. But I tether everything that I'm carrying, myself and gear, whenever I'm doing a photo shoot.
Well, that's a good transition. Let's talk about gear. We had a couple different questions about the equipment that people use. Is brand important, or what about the quality of lenses? I know most of the major manufacturers offer different qualities of lenses. Let's touch on that subject for a minute. Ned, why don't you start this one?
Okay, I'm sort of in a probably unique position where I've chopped and changed brands over the last 20 years. I started off with Canon, I went to Nikon, I changed to Sony for a while to try it out when they came out, and now I'm back with Canon. Now, as long as you have good quality glass, like obviously try and go for the L series lenses, which have the best glass in them. I always 24 to 70 2.8L or 70 to 200 2.8L. That's the largest, like Mike said, which you'll probably find me using. Anything other than that, there's not really much point, because the vibrations come through. Even when you're in a stable platform like a 407 or a H125, you get past that 70 to 200, you'll start to get the vibrations. Now, I've recently gone into mirrorless, and I'm playing around with 2 of the Canon R5s. Thing I love about that, the quality and the pixels in it are absolutely unbelievable. 48 megapixel camera, mind you, you're working in a bigger format, so to speak, but it gives that extra crispness to an image. Nikon and Canon, I actually don't really think there's much to differentiate. It's the same as Audi versus BMW. No offense there, Mike. And you know, it's to me, a lot of it comes down to the person behind the camera. There's some fantastic photographers out there, which I think no matter what camera they use, you know, again, like Mike said, Lloyd Horgan shoots amazing stuff. Anthony Pecci, one of my new guys, Jason Jorgensen, who shoots some absolutely stunning imagery, and he doesn't have the top quality gear yet. And I'm excited to see what these young guys do when they have the best that's available out there. And obviously that has a price to buy.
Mike, you want to go next?
Sure. Actually, I agree with everything that that Ned has said. I mean, there's the difference between Nikon and Canon now. I mean, they both have their pluses and minuses. At the end of the day, you're shooting with the top of the line. And now Sony, you know, they've certainly closed the gap. But I find on the Sony side for video, some of our photographers are shooting Sony. Like if we're doing a trade show, we might be shooting Sony for the social media channels. So I think for the equipment, those 2 brands, and it's the prime lenses, the L lenses, and really the selection of lenses. You don't really need that many lenses on a shoot. Typically, I'm taking 3, but the 4th will be my 10 mil. Depending on what I know I'm going to be flying on, I'll take the 10 mil. Not everyone likes the curves that you get with the 10 mil, but 70 to 200 will be the biggest lens. So no, I think that's a big thing, is that the gear that you're taking, ensure it's only what you need. Again, the less that you have in the aircraft, the better. And that's key. And as Lyn alluded to, is, you know, there's a lot of things when you're opening up your bag, you know, it's even things that are in your bag, is that you've got wind coming in that aircraft. Well, that can then upset things that are in your camera bag that can also go out the door. So there's a lot of things that you have to make sure that you are doing everything you can to mitigate anything exiting that aircraft. So for the equipment, quality, and like I said, it's just taking what you need, and that's it.
Lyn, I think I saw in one of your pictures that you were shooting Sony. Is that what you shooting right now?
Yeah, I agree with Ned and Mike both on the Nikon versus Canon. I started out with Nikon maybe 20 years ago. 10 years ago, I transitioned to the Canon 1DX, which is like their big flagship, super expensive, nice camera. I used to see Neville walking around. He'd have 2 of those things. I mean, he must have unlimited cash, 2 of those things hanging off his body. But as I started moving into video, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I started transitioning away from the Canon 1DX. Although it's an amazing video camera, it's just too big. So now, like Ned was saying, with the mirrorless, I'm shooting the Sony A7, and I have one right here, and I have it on a Zhiyun crane gimbal. So this is something that I might shoot video with, and we call it running and gunning. You're running around with this thing. Sony A7 mirrorless, full frame, shoots 43 meg, files, really nice camera. And I typically would shoot 2 cards, one shooting RAW, one shooting JPEG. So you kind of have a backup, even though I use mostly only RAW. It's a beautiful camera. Mike nailed it. 3 lenses really is all you need. For me, I just use a nice wide lens, a 16 to 25, and then a middle lens, maybe a 35 to 70, and then a long lens, a 70 to 200, or maybe something just a little bit longer than that if you have it. But quality glass is probably the key. Get the most expensive or best quality glass that you can afford, rather. So yeah, I've transitioned all completely to Sony. And the only other piece of gear I would say throw in, or a couple of pieces, are some filters. Maybe get yourself an adjustable ND filter. It is really good for controlling light. Also a polarizer for, if there's a lot of reflection off the water or the cockpit or something along those lines. So that's kind of where I've transitioned to the Sony.
Well, and then you actually bring up another good topic with the stabilizer, the gimbal there. Most cameras or lenses have stabilization in them nowadays. How important is that to have in an aircraft when you're shooting an external gimbal or stabilizer? Why don't you go ahead and start with that one, Lyn, since you had your system out?
Yeah, I think from the standpoint of photography, I don't know that it's necessarily that important. I look at some of the photos that Neville and Mike have shot with, and I mean, having a gimbal, there is stabilization in the camera, but these guys have such good control, camera control. Like that photo that Mike was showing where he said he shot it at a 60th. That's insane. That's like, it's so hard to do that. Neville did it one time at a trade show. He whipped his camera up, a helicopter was flying by, and at a 60th, he took a photo because I had a new 1DX and I was trying to get some settings right and he was helping me. And he just followed the aircraft perfectly, and it was as crisp and beautiful as can be. So with photography, it's a little bit easier. But when you're shooting videography now, you're instantly switching back and forth between, you might be shooting photography at a 60th or 200th or anything in between, depending on what kind of aircraft you're in and how much it's shaking. But when you're doing videography, you're switching gears, you're going to a 50th of a second. And now and that's what you're shooting at. So you need to have some stabilization there. So if I'm shooting video, I'm typically stabilized. If I'm shooting photography, I'm typically not. But if I can take a photo on the gimbal, and it's something simple, I'll do it. But you really don't have to have it.
Ned or Mike, you guys want to toss anything in there on that one?
Yeah, just with the, so you find what Lyn said. So you do need some stabilization for the video side. I mean, having a gimbal or some sort of stabilizer, that's imperative when you're shooting video. Stills, not a problem. The cameras have the built-in stabilization into them. A big thing too is that when we are using the longer lenses, or in certain situations, I think when Ned was taking that picture of that EC-135, there's no question you're hanging out the door a bit. So one of the things you got to watch is that you're not getting out of, if you say you're doing 100 knots, you're not out of this, you're into the airflow. So you're into the airflow, now your lens is going to be doing this. It's just going to be moving, and it's going to be very difficult. So that's where, to help with the stabilization, is keeping in the cabin of the aircraft. There's been many times I've shot down at a 20th of a second. So you make sure that you've got everything you need. So you're shooting at a 1/20th or 1/60th of a second. And then when I look and I say, okay, I've got 15 more minutes, let's try to do some low shutter stuff. Pick a background that you think is going to look pretty cool. That's a low shutter speed. So you'll get that blur in the background, but the aircraft will be sharp. So I'll be down 15th or 20th of a second, but it's going to take you probably about 40 or 50 shots to make sure that you got one shot that's tack sharp. I think all three of us have done it. We're looking down on a helicopter, and they might have a Bambi bucket on it, or they're snorkeling, and we've got a full disc on the helicopter. And that's usually at a 15th or a 20th. And that also goes into the helicopter you're flying in. What are the vibrations like? A lot of times you're lucky if it's a 407 or an H-125, which that tends to be most of the helicopters we're shooting out of. Then you can get pretty smooth platform. If it's an R-44, not as smooth, but you can still get the shot. But that's a big thing, is with the stabilization. It's, when I look at a shot, or a shoot, sorry, is that what are the conditions like that day? So I already know before I go up, okay, here's the speeds I'm going to be working with on my camera. Is it incredibly windy? And the environment is that, so you'll take that into consideration. So then when I have the time, that's when I know I've got what I need, then I'll slow the shutter down, just for effect, to try and get some different shots. But the stabilization, I mean, the old days when Ned and I started, I don't think Lyn was in this case, but when Ned and I started, it was slides. That's what we were shooting. And, in those days, we didn't know until maybe a week later that we got the shots that we needed, versus today, it's instantaneous. As soon as you're done that sequence, you're looking at the camera and go, okay, we got the shot. So we didn't have stabilization back then, and we didn't have the ability to get that instant gratification that you got the photo. So I think that's cameras have certainly come a long way that have allowed us to do the things that we're doing in the when it comes to helicopter photography. And then video, I see, is the next segment of that, where now you're seeing the video capability that's improving to go along with it as well. And that's to address basically the social media side of things. Things have changed. So,
Ned, anything you want to add there?
No, basically, I'd agree with everything that Mike and Lyn have said. In the old days, I should say, I tried using the KenLab gyro stabilizers, which were bolted onto the bottom of the camera lens. But one of the issues that we used to find with them is, as the in-lens stabilization got better, it would actually constantly fight with the gyro stabilizer. And especially when you're doing work like Lyn does with video cameras, you always basically want the horizon level. You've got it bolted on the bottom and it works fantastic. In a helicopter, probably 70% of the time, the horizon's not level. So as you're in a turn, unless you actually keep loosening off the bracket that the gyro stabilizer is bolted onto the bottom of your lens with, and you're turning the camera vertical axis, and you're in a steep turn and you're constantly moving it, you're also actually fighting with the gyro stabilizer and in the end, it's just like, nah, too hard, take it off, chuck it in the thing. And again, the stabilization is getting so good in the cameras and the lenses now that it makes it so much easier for us. And going to the new modern day mirrorless cameras, like Mike said, you sit there and look at all the settings and the thing, oh yeah, that worked, that didn't, let's do this, we've got more minutes. I remember going on a trip to Africa, flew all the way over there, thought, oh, yeah, I'll try this setting, see how that goes. Shot 120 rolls of Velvia and Provia back in those days, came home, got it all developed, and I think I got 10 frames that were any good, and it was like, oh crap, that didn't work. So, but now these days we don't have that issue.
Well, that brings up another issue that I've had several people ask about. How do you get the rotor blur? Do either or any of you have tips or tricks for doing that? I mean, I think each of you have been shooting long enough that you kind of know where to start. Does it depend on the light? Does it depend on the rotor speed of the helicopter you're shooting? What are the factors you consider when you're trying to do that? And, see, Mike, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. So I guess for me, light, not so much. It's just going to come down to shutter speed. To get that rotor blur, it's all about shutter speed. And the only way you're going to get it, like I said, it's in smooth air. That's why I always like to say is that to the pilots is that when we get into smooth air, and I'll let them know I'm going to be doing some low shutter speed to get that blur. And it does depend on what helicopter you're shooting. So if you're shooting anything that's a two-bladed from R22 up to 212, it's going to be tough to get a full disc on anything that's two-bladed, especially a Bell medium. If it's anything that's 407 or H125 or basically almost all the Airbuses with multi, 3 rotors plus, then it's a lot easier. The other thing that makes a rotor blur interesting is when they have high vis blades. So when you don't have any striping on the blades and you're doing you get a rotor blur, it's still a nice shot, but it's just okay. But when you have the high vis striping on the top of the blades, it makes a difference. So when you've got that yellow disc, because it makes the disc stand out a lot more. So I find you can get a far more dynamic shot if you've got the high vis striping on the blades. So, but for me, it's all about just shutter speed.
Okay. Lyn, how about you? Do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I agree with what Mike just said. The one thing that I do, or technique that I do, because like Mike said, it depends on the aircraft you're shooting and the aircraft you're in. So if you're in a two-bladed helicopter, like a Jet Ranger or a 44 or something along those lines, they typically can be a lot more bumpy. But if you're in an MD500, it's smooth as glass under most conditions, unless it's really windy. So what I'll do is, if I'm unsure how bumpy it's going to be once we get up there or how smooth the pilot is, I'll bracket. I'll just shutter speed. I'll start at the lowest that I think I can do. Maybe in this condition, I'm in an R44 and it's kind of windy and it's bumpy. I might start at a 60th of a second. And then I just start bracketing up all the way maybe to 250th. And of course, once you start getting into that range, then you're not getting any blur at all. You're getting a little bit of blur, but not much. It just depends on what aircraft you're actually shooting. So bracketing is a good technique. And then if you feel like, okay, I got a good one, then you can really, explore, like Mike was saying, and start dropping below a 60th. I rarely do that myself, but I know he does it successfully. I just don't think I have the smooth hands, I guess, but that's what I do is I bracket.
Ned, want to finish on that one?
Yeah, I agree with what Mike and both of what Lyn said. It all just comes down to your shutter speed. And one of the things that, that I always find when I try to get some good rotor blur is actually try it from all different angles, because sometimes you can shoot from one angle and you can get away with a slightly higher shutter speed versus shooting from a different angle where you actually need that lot lower shutter speed. One of the things that I love doing is you'll be over the top of an aircraft 100 feet above it, and you just coordinate with the pilot to basically tip your camera ship on its side to a real, load up the turn. And so you're doing like a pirouette over the other aircraft, looking straight down through the top of the rotor blades, and you actually can get some really cool sort of effects by doing things like that. But apart from what the boys said, I agree 100%.
Okay, well, we've talked to, go ahead.
Sorry, just one more thing, Dan, about the rotor blur. So I guess for anyone out there shooting helicopters, once you start to get above 1/60th, now you're just going to start to get stop rotor blades. So anything beyond that, so we have several of us here have photo contests that we run. We've just started going through all our photos, and first thing, if I see a helicopter's got stopped rotor blades, it's not making it into the selection as far as what we start to vote on. So I think that's a big thing. And when we're flying, so a lot of people tend to fly same altitude. So when you're flying same altitude, you don't see the top of the disc. You're just looking at a rotor blade that's going by you're just looking at the side. So one of the things that I always make sure is that I tell my pilots, if you don't see the top of that rotor disc, then we're too high. The photo ship that they were chasing, he's too high. But you also want to keep them low for safety. So one of the things that we do in our briefing is I tell the pilots is that at no time, unless I ask you to, are you to come any higher than below our skids. I want you at all times about 15 to 20 feet lower than our skids. So that helps if you get into a situation, someone's lost situational awareness and all of a sudden you're starting to merge. It's never happened to me, but if it does, there is an out for them. So that's one of the big things. And then that also allows you to see the top of the blade. So that really makes the difference between an okay photo and a really good photo is when you can look down on the top of the blades versus just looking at the same altitude as a aircraft that's straight beside you.
Okay, appreciate that, Mike. We've talked about the equipment. We've talked about shooting from the aircraft. Let's talk a little bit about post-production. Lyn, you were talking about shooting raw. Actually, I think each of you talked about shooting raw and JPEG. What are the advantages of shooting raw, and what are your post-production? What post-production work do you use? What software do you use? Things like that. Ned, let's start with you on this one.
Okay. I'm probably more of a traditionalist where my attitude is if anyone watching this webinar or whatever, if you were sitting right next to me, you would see exactly the same thing. The only time I will sort of, not, I suppose manipulate's the wrong word, my images is I might brighten it up just a fraction, and crop it. But apart from that, I like to have my images as original as they are. And that gets to show the lighting, for example, like that one there. Yes, it was a sort of a crappy overcast day. I had them tucked in nice and tight. There's some dark patches on there. Sun's coming from the other side, but it still has that effect. I've seen other photographers, none of the guys on this webinar, that will, brighten up all this side and you can see inside the cockpit. But to me, that's not what you would actually see. I know for some reasons, you know, manufacturers and that will manipulate images. But again, that's for their own reasons. I shoot everything in RAW, as I presume Mike does. I import them in using Photo Mechanic. I will go through, edit all my photos, then I will keep the ones that I want. I'll go into Adobe Lightroom and I'll crop the images that I want. Then I'll export them as a JPEG. And that's usually what my end images result as.
Okay, Lynn, how about you next?
Yeah, so my workflow is go out, do the shoot. My goal is to use only raw images, but like I said, I always have a backup of JPEG just in case that card goes bad and you're stuck and you need photos, you can revert back to the JPEG images. I'll go through all of them. And if you take a few hundred on a photo shoot or even more, then you'll go through and pick out your top 20, 25, narrow those down, and then I'll plug those into either Photoshop or Lightroom. Traditionally, I like to use Photoshop, and I typically will do exactly like what Ned said. I may crop it, I may boost the brightness just a little bit if it's a little bit dark. Usually when you're looking at, you know, when you open a raw image, it looks different than what you actually saw when you put it into Photoshop. So you're trying to get it to look as natural as possible. I will, however, Photoshop is great if you're taking artistic license or trying to make a mediocre photo look more interesting. Then you can do more color adjustments, more light adjustments, things of that nature. Or maybe you want to desaturate a photo and leave just a certain part of it saturated because it is highlighting something, or it just makes a photo look that much more interesting, or it's an effect that you want to add to the layout in the magazine. Maybe all the photos in a specific story will be desaturated with some level of saturation or some component of it saturated. So I'm not the kind that says, hey, I just want a photo to look exactly like it did out in the field. I like to take creative license on occasion, but more often than not, I'm trying to keep them looking as natural as possible.
Well, and Mike, you showed a couple of images that you said were basically straight out of the camera. So it sounds like you're do roughly the same thing. Want to elaborate there?
Actually, the one thing that would probably surprise everyone is that I don't shoot anything raw. Everything I shoot is JPEG right out of the camera. So all those images that you saw there, I didn't do any manipulation to those images. I find with the cameras today, they're data hogs. So you imagine you come back from a photo shoot, and how many gig of photos do you have when you're shooting raw? So it could be a couple hundred gig that you have. So it's where you're going to store all those photos. But I've never had a requirement ever that I wish I had a raw image. So I just look at it as just convenience, and it's also for processing. So for me, for my post-production, same as these two, I use Lightroom. I've seen people spend an hour, 2 hours on one image. I can do a photo shoot, go through and edit the whole photo shoot in typically about 2 hours. I can go through and have everything edited and done. I just did an interesting shoot for Orange here in Toronto a couple of weeks ago. They wanted to illustrate me flying into a hospital pad that is just surrounded in condos. So they need this to help show the condo development that they're starting to encroach on the approaches going into it. So did the shoot, and what they were expecting is that several weeks later they would get the photos, and I had the photos to them within it was 12 hours after the photo shoot. We had everything to them. So I just find with the processing to be able to get things to them quickly, I just never have had a requirement to have a raw file. So everyone has their own preferences, but for me, I think it's 10 years since I shot a raw photo.
I don't want to run us out of time. We've got about 15 minutes left, including some of my wrap-up time. One question that has appeared repeatedly, and I will say, I think we've had more questions for this topic than I've had for any of the webinars previously, which is impressive. Let's start with Lynn on this one. are there room for new photographers in the industry? And how do you submit images to your magazine if you want to start trying to provide images to start shooting for you?
Absolutely, there is room for more photographers. In fact, it always seemed like for the last 10 years or so, there was just this very tiny handful of photographers, maybe 10, that were going out and getting spectacular work. And part of the reason is because there has to be a level of trust. You can say, I'm a photographer and I have a camera and I really know how to use it really well. But that doesn't get you into the door of a helicopter operation, right? You need to be able to speak their language. You need to be able to understand, like I was saying in my opening statements, what the pilot's priorities are going to be. And that's one of the things I loved about both Mike and Ned. Instantly, you can tell that they've got decades of doing this, because they were both pointing to, Ned started off by saying, the wind direction was a front quartering headwind. Like, he has this real understanding of what wind does to a helicopter. And Mike was talking about VNE and speed. He has this real understanding. So understanding those items will help when you ask somebody, hey, can I do a photo shoot, right? That you walk in there at least having an understanding, and they will trust you. That's the biggest part of being able to successfully get photos or video in a helicopter operation, is they have to trust you. So I would say there's plenty of room for other photographers out there. Do what Mike said, come with photography and some Instagram clips, something along those lines to kind of get your foot in the door. They can email me, Lyn.Burks at Rotorcraft Pro, as the editor, and I'll start a rapport, a relationship. We have several photographers doing work with us. So yes, there's plenty of room for more photographers, but it begins with educating yourself and then trying to get some trust between yourself and an operator.
Mike, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of room, and I look at which I alluded to earlier, is some of the new cadre of photographers that are coming up that are incredibly talented. I'll give you a good example. I'm going to use Lloyd Horgan as an example. So Lloyd's a young guy. He would send a couple of photos here and there, and we would use them. And then he went to an exercise over in Europe. So Lloyd's actually based out of the UK. And he did a great job with the photos that he sent back and the report that came with it. But he had the opportunity to work with Alon Head, which a lot of you know. She was doing a story over in Europe, and she worked with Lloyd as well. And she said, you know what? He's young, but he's eager to learn. But it was what she saw was the level of maturity, and it was the working with the crews, the communication side of things. Fast forward, now Lloyd's full time with us, and he's running all our social media on the helicopter side of the house at MHM Publishing. So there's opportunities there for the younger generation coming through. I find that they do bring new ideas, new creativity. I mean, I think we all agree that we see a photo by Anthony Pecci and we scratch our heads going, how did he do that? I mean, there's a famous photo we had with the whole Airbus fleet, with the H160, A400, I forget what the other, or Typhoon was in there as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for the helicopter photography side of things. And I think social media has certainly shown some of these people, the capabilities that they have. But like I said earlier, photography and videography, that's the key. That's going to get our attention anyway. Okay,
Ned, what about for you?
You know what? Have to agree with what Mike and Lyn said. This industry it's small as in the segment of aviation industry, but it's massive as in it's worldwide. There's so many different operators and so many different countries doing so many different things. Those of us like Mike, Lyn, and myself, and the sort of the older brigade, we can't be everywhere to capture everything. It's this next generation, like Lloyd Horgan. We've got some fantastic guys, and Jason Jorgensen. I've got Jimmy Van Drunen in the Netherlands who's come on board, who again, it shoots some amazing stuff. Theo Valiant. The younger generation seem to they shoot some amazing shots because they're looking at it outside the box. And that's the key thing to remember. And Mike and Lyn will both say the same thing. a helicopter photo of a helicopter flying along, side on, and people send it in and go, wow, check out this great image. And without being disrespectful to someone, it's like, okay, yeah, that's nice. But then you look at some of the shots that some of these guys, when they think outside the box, get, and it's like, shit, that's cool. I like that. And there's an old saying, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So if you're going to send myself, Lyn, Mike, images, give us something that we're going to go, shit, that's cool. I like that. And that's going to open the door. And that's what happened with Jimmy Van Drunen, who's one of our Dutch guys. He sent me some photos. We published a story of it and thought, okay, let's give him an opportunity. I had a friend of mine, Sasha Fleischman from Lions Air in Zurich. He needed some VIP AW139 shot. He got Jimmy, took him over to Switzerland. They did a great formation shoot in the evening, and he got some absolutely stunning images. And I think Michael will agree with me here, when you take the gamble on some of these young guys, give them the opportunity, and they excel and exceed your expectations, there's that satisfaction that, you know what, going ahead, we therefore have the ability to delegate some of this stuff to these younger guys and know that they will give us the best that they can and then some. And Lloyd Horgan's a classic example. I've watched Lloyd from when he first started doing stuff, and he's got better and better. His video work is fantastic. And my guys like Theo went out and spent a day with him, learned a whole bunch of stuff from him. So even though Lloyd's a new guy for vertical, he's even passing on his experience and knowledge to some of the younger next generation after him, which is fantastic to see.
Okay, real quick, this will be a yes or no question. My expectation is if people are especially outside of your country, they can email you a photo link. If they happen to be in Dallas in March and they have a tablet full of photos, can they stop by your booth and talk to you about their photos? Mike?
Absolutely.
Ned?
Yep, absolutely. If our government lets us out of the country. No, and we're there.
Oh, so maybe email still for that. And how about you, for Lyn?
Yes.
Okay, great.
We'll be there.
We're going to go ahead and get wrapped up. I'm going to ask everybody one final question, our traditional final question. I'll start with Lyn. If there's one thing you want people to take away from this today, what would that be?
From my perspective, it is for the pilots to understand what the photographer needs, but more importantly, for a new photographer to understand what the pilot needs, learn as much as you possibly can, because the two things that are going to kill you is while you're hovering out of ground effect and you get yourself into an LTE or settling with power situation, or a collision, an air-to-air collision, because that rate of closure can come super fast. So you have to be careful what you're doing. So photographers, learn about what the pilots are doing.
Mike?
Cost. So there's a big thing. One of the things we didn't touch on was cost. This is a very expensive thing that we do when we're going up and we're photographing helicopters. So it's usually on the operator's dime. I've done photo shoots where we came back and it probably cost the operator $40,000 or $50,000 to do a photo shoot. So what we do, going out and capturing helicopters around the world, it is pretty cool, but it's also dangerous. You know, that is a thing that we've talked about, the things, how we can do it safely, how we can mitigate risk to do these things. It's at the end of the day, it's just a photo. So how can we do that? How can we communicate what we want with the pilots? How can we stay in constant communication when they're in the air? And how can we do it cost effectively? So it is a very expensive thing that we do, capturing helicopters air to air, far more expensive than planes. But I think that's the biggest thing is so safety, cost.
Perfect. Ned?
Yep,
Ned gets the last word. Strangely enough, Ned gets the last word.
No, that's fine. I have to agree with everything that the guys have said. I would say to a lot of the younger guys out there, back yourself. And you know what? Think outside the box, look for something different, but always remember those key things: communication, situational awareness, and safety. Because without one of those three things, shit can go bad real quick. And you always have to remember, It's not just you there by yourself. You're part of a team. You and the pilot need to work together to get great imagery, to stay safe, and come home at the end of the day. Simple as that.
That's awesome. Now I'd like to invite Jim Viola to come back on with his camera. Jim, did you want to say anything as we wrap up?
Yeah, I thought that was great. It was very, very educational, and really do look forward to seeing you guys in Dallas. So thanks.
Okay, appreciate that, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time. I'm thinking maybe for our next, we're going to have to do this again, I think, but maybe what I'll have you do is nominate a photographer to take your place for the next time we do this. And maybe that'll be the new and up and coming photographers. So gentlemen, I'm grateful for your time, your willingness to share your information for the pilots, for the photographers, and for the industry. This was really a helpful and really enjoyable webinar for me. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity, Dan.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Likewise,
Appreciate it.
Gentlemen, I'm
likewise,
going
everyone,
to
and keep shooting.
there we go. Gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up and finish things here real quick. Appreciate your time. Get my screen back. Do you want to share websites? I think I've got everybody's website correct. Rotorcraft Pro, just helicopters. I did notice that if you type in rotorcraftpro.com, you will still go to just helicopters. So I think that goes both ways for it. HeliOps magazine, real simple, heliopsmag.com. Ned and Vertical Magazine both have photo contests, verticalmag.com. And Rotor, the HAI publication, we're having a photo contest right now too. I think Vertical Mag's just closed, but Ned, I think, does a weekly one on social media. So if you have any questions, you want to go back and look at some of their photos, there's going to be a bunch of them on their web pages. Really looking forward to seeing some of the photos in the future too. As we mentioned just a minute ago, Heli Expo is coming up. This is a great week. The attendee registration is just opened up. If you have any questions about what's going on, where it's going on, we're going to be back in Dallas. This is the, we were last there in 2017. It's going to be the first big live helicopter event since the pandemic really started. We've had a couple smaller ones. There's been a couple of other aviation events, but this one is for the helicopter industry. So if you love helicopters like I do, you really need to attend at least one Heli Expo in your lifetime. It's really worth it. Dallas is an easy place to get to. If you go to heliexpo.com, you're going to find information about registration. You're going to find information about housing. You're going to find a lot of information about classes. You'll find as complete of an exhibitor list as we can give you right now. I understand we have over 400 exhibitors already. That will continue to expand as we get closer to the show. But go ahead and take time to visit heliexpo.com. Save the date to our upcoming webinars, November 4th, How to Fly Neighborly in the Bell 206. We've had some great interest on our different Fly Neighborly programs on different aircraft and different airframes. The Bell 206, of course, is a venerable workhorse. It's everywhere. They're great machines. And so what can we do to make that a little bit quieter for the neighbors that we're flying around? On November 11th, we will not hold a webinar. That is Veterans Day. Well, it's only observed in certain countries. HAI absolutely salutes the men and women who are serving or have served their countries in their military service. We are grateful for the time that you spent serving your country. And so we will take that day off in your honor. We would like your feedback. We will be sending a survey around to the people who registered and attended. We are grateful for your time. We'd like to know what you liked about this, what you didn't like about this. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions today, and I will try to get responses to some of those questions that we missed and get them emailed back to you. If you have suggestions for future topics, we'd like to hear that as well. And then if there's anything you'd like HAI to do, one of the things that popped up in our survey for us earlier this year was SMS for small operators. We just introduced an SMS for small operators program. And so we absolutely pay attention to what our members are telling us, what the industry are telling us. The best way to do that is the email address president@rotor.org. Jim does see all those emails, and he does task the staff with those responses. that kind of wraps us up. This was a bit longer than a normal webinar, but we are grateful to Lyn, to Mike, and to Ned for joining us today. Until next week, we ask that you be safe, that you fly safe, and we'll see you again very soon.